My name is Patrick Halstead, and I want to thank you for joining me today. I do have some background noise. Apparently, the landscapers are busy here in Kirkland, Washington, outside my office here, so hopefully I'm not going to be too noisy, and we may need to retape it. So let's see, quickly then, we are going to do a quick webinar this morning to show you, last week we did Office 365, and in the previous week, on Saturday, I was at the Office 365 Saturday, the first one ever in Redmond, Washington, at Microsoft, and I presented on these Sandbox techniques. And I also extended the webinar that we did last week with a couple of samples I'm going to show you today. And I also have a bonus demo for you. So once again, if you don't have audio, we'll be taping this and putting it out on our YouTube site. So rest assured you will have a way to hear it later. You can't hear it now. You didn't hear that. So there is a big push here towards 365 for Microsoft, and it really last year, as I mentioned last week, Microsoft hired us to do some Channel 9 training, and we did this 4-part training module for Channel 9. Those of you who were in last week's webinar will recall that Channel 9 is Microsoft's one of Microsoft's training sites, and they noticed about a year ago that they did some analysis on their web search results, and they realized that InfoPath was the #1 most searched for item, and they didn't have a lot of 365 training for it. This is about April timeframe last year, so they contacted us because we have all these InfoPath MVPs here at Qdabra. And we created this 4-part training for them, and that went live finally in December. Actually, we were done in June, but they had some processing there. They had lots of stuff come up, and it didn't end up going live. But it's on the web now. And we were just at the 365 Saturday, and Microsoft, of course, is pushing 365 as your cloud-based SharePoint Online, whatever. You got Link, Exchange, whole bunch of stuff out there, and it's a great value prop. And we were saying last week that, well, it's only an E3. InfoPath Form Services is only an E3. Well, that's not true. What we found out over the weekend was that you can do browser-based forms in the SharePoint Online, the P2 package, which is less than half the cost of E3. It's about $10 a month per person, which means that there will be many more people using InfoPath to create web pages and forms on Office 365. And we talked last week about the difference between the Sandbox in Office 365 and in SharePoint 2010. And specifically, not all the web services are supported. So we're going to talk about that again this week. Here's the 2010 Sandbox. It's a very expansive scene here. Everything is supported, right? Not so in SharePoint, in Office 365. You don't have everything. So today what I want to do is do these, basically, I'll talk about the demo in a second, but to recap, the takeaway today is that the P2 plan does support the browser, and I want to do a shout out to Martina Braun, who's an Office 365 MVP from Austria. She's the one that came up to me after the presentation on Saturday and let me know this fact. Very, very exciting for me. I think it's the most exciting news I've heard because of what it means for InfoPath. So we're going to go over the Sandbox web service limitations today in 365. Specifically, we're going to talk about taxonomy and user profile. I'm going to show you how you can get the user's name in an InfoPath form in 365. I'm going to create a form and pull in the user information. You can't do this with out-of-box 365 because there's no user profile service. And so I'll show you how to get around that with this little add-in that we have. You'll get the free sample, so you can reuse it in your forms as well. The taxonomy then is another area that is limited, and this one's actually even more limited. The user profile information can be pulled into an InfoPath browser form, but the taxonomy cannot. And once again, it's the difference between what's running there in the Sandbox, in the server-side object model of SharePoint 365, and what's available in the client, when calling from the client to the web service. So we'll go through that. I'll show you an example in the filler. For those of you who have the ability to fill out the form in the rich client, the InfoPath filler, you'll be able to get your term sets, and I'll show you a drop-down example of that. There are a couple tips, and we'll talk about these in depth, well, not in depth, but we'll touch upon these. Basically, you want to make sure that your buttons are posting back. We had a person in the forum this morning who was complaining that the performance of their 2010 form was slow because it kept posting back. Well, I'll show you where you go in InfoPath form to adjust that setting. And then there's one key thing you want to keep in mind when you're adding these data connections is you don't necessarily want to add them on load. You don't want to add them to fire on load. So 365 Sandbox, not quite as expansive. You do have quite a few features though, and that's the key takeaway, is that you can do quite a bit with 365 Sandbox. Today's demos, like I just mentioned, I'm going to show you the user profile information, pulling that into a form. I'm going to create a form from scratch and do that. I'm also going to show you the taxonomy information. Pulling the taxonomy is a little more complicated because the taxonomy structure is very convoluted, but I'll go through and show you an example of that. Then I have another demo on the expense report. Last week we showed how to submit items from a repeating structure into a list, and I'll show you that example again. And what I've done is I've extended it this week to show you how you would refresh items in the form if the list changes. So if the list, somebody goes into SharePoint, edits the items in the SharePoint list, those items can then be also updated in your InfoPath form. And if we have time as an alpha plus alpha at the end here, I'm going to show you a compliance solution that we developed to help enforce best practices. This is completely unrelated to 365. Well, it is. It's valid. It's relevant. However, it's a generic solution that can be used for SharePoint, 365, or whatever. If you have questions, please use the Q&A at the top. We do have a moderator this morning, and I will be answering questions at the end. So let's just jump into demos then. So I'm going to start by at the very beginning here by creating a form from scratch, and this is just the 2010 designer. And I'm going to pick a browser form because I want to be able to show this in the 365 browser without running InfoPath on the client. And the first thing, I'm just going to create a real simple form to do this and show you how you would do it. So we're just going to call this Get User Properties. And we'll have a label here. We're going to add into the main data source here a value for the property name. So just the user, I think that's what I really need. And we'll just drag that guy over. Okay, we're going to make this a drop down. And I've got a few values here, but the first value I want to use is I just want to use a current user. So actually, a lot of times you're going to want to, you don't need a drop down here, you're going to want to just basically have it fill in with the user's name. So we could just do that. But there's also a lot of information that's in user properties. So what I'm going to do is make this a drop down, and instead of pulling from a secondary data source, I'm just going to type in some values here, and I'll say this is the current user. Current user is a blank user. And values blank. Okay, now we're going to add a couple more here. And on my SharePoint site, I've got a bunch of different people with me, which isn't very interesting because I'm the current user. So we'll use filler instead. And I guess we can add one more for Jim. Okay, so I've got three people with myself, current user, and Jim Hillary. Okay, and let's just make sure I have the format correct. And I don't believe that it's going to matter if we have a lowercase or uppercase, but we'll make a note of that. Okay, so now I've got my simple form. Now, in order to get this functionality, what you need to do is you need to use this common library. And you're going to get this sample that has a common library injected in it, and you'll be able to reuse it. But what I need to do first is I need to inject it into the form. And so I've got another sample here. I'm just going to, first of time, I'm just going to drag this over and show you what I've got here. I've got this form here is the same thing, basically. It's got the user dropdown, and it's got some properties. It's going to pull those properties into the form. So if I run this form in the preview, it's going to, I'll show you the data connection in a second, but it's going to go out to my Office 365 site, and it's going to pull in the value for the current user, which is me. And you'll see that there's a lot of properties that are stored in 365, many of which I don't have set. So we have not gone in there and actually created these. We haven't put in my title, my department, and all that stuff, but you can do that. And your site will look different because you might have filled that information in already. And this is the 365 site. Now, when I publish this out to the, now let me just show you the data connection here. So the data connection, you're going to add this get user profile by name data connection. You can see that the sample will already have it, so you won't have to worry about that. But this is the key thing that tells the common library, that tells your command where to go to get the 365 user information. And so you can see here that this has actually been converted into a UDCX file, and that is the best practice. Let's take a look at my 365 site here. And I've got a data connection library, and you can see that I've uploaded this, where is it? Get user, that's not it. I guess that is it, get user profile by name. So this is the actual data connection, and I've uploaded it. And what this is doing is it's just querying it's querying the SharePoint site. And if you want, you can look at these. You can open these up in Notepad. You can take a look at where it's querying. So here, this UDC file, there's a bunch of XML here, but you can see if you read in here that this is actually, here's the site where it's calling a user profile service.smx. So once again, from InfoPath directly, you can't call this guy and get reasonable results back, but you can if you call it from within the server. In the browser, you can't call this directly. You have to actually call it through the object model. And that's what our plugin allows you to do. Okay, like I said, you'll get that sample. Let's just take a look at this in the browser, and you'll see the difference here. So you saw it, I just queried it from the client, and it pulled back a bunch of information. From the browser, it's actually, this is a different form. I'll go back to the right one. In the browser, it's going to query it, and it's not going to get as much information. Now, what you would want to do, so it only has these 5 different items, but you can get the username. That's the key thing, is you're going to want to automatically set your field to the username on open and make that read-only so people can't change their name. And you're also going to want to pull in the login information and get the end string here so you know what their email alias is. And you can get those 2 pieces of information. Now, how would you change this to make it on load? Let's do that real quick. So here in the form, I would go into my data connections, and actually I would go into my home tab, and I would click on data tab, and there's form load, and you're going to add in a rule here, actually, that queries it. Another way to do it is you can actually just set the event on the finished loading here. You can add an action to do the same thing. So what are we doing? We're actually going to be doing this command here. So this is how we actually get the user information. We get 2 commands. One is if the user is blank, and the other one if it's not blank. If the user's name is not blank, we have to get the username correctly. The way we're doing that is we're using the concat function, and we're actually just appending that information that we need, that extra information to prefix that name of the user. So let's see how this works here. So what I want to do is copy this command. Actually, I want to copy both of them. So there's a command here in 2010 that allows you to copy both rows. That's great. So now I can go into here and just paste them. And then I can delete this. Now obviously the user's name is going to be blank on load, so we can delete this one, I suppose, or disable it. Okay, now when I preview, it's going to automatically get the value on open. You can see it's trying to do that. That's why I got the pop-up. And there we go. Now, let's publish this off to SharePoint. So you can go to File Publish. You can see here that this is indeed the right site that I was using. So I'll just do the quick publish. One of the other benefits of 2010 is that you can quickly republish your forms. Huge time saver. Okay, and then if I go out to the site now, it actually should tell me when it's done. Let's make sure it does here. Okay, where am I going to go? Hopefully you guys can still hear me. Let's try it one more time. So it's publishing, it's verifying the form in the form server, and hopefully it's going to give us a pop-up here and show us it succeeded. It's not. Okay, well, I'm going to skip that then, but you can get information from other users. If we select Hillary's name here, you can get her properties, and that's how you do that. Okay, let's quickly switch to the next demo then. Once again, this is the taxonomy. Okay, so let me show you this real quick. I've actually taken the form and I've extended it to use the taxonomy. And let me just find that example. Okay, here it is. So take the same form, and I've added this section here on the bottom, which is the get term sets. Now what this is doing is there's a few extra connections here. I had to add this get term sets data connection. Once again, this is a UDC. The first time you add it, you're going to add it just as you would a normal connection, and then you're going to convert it to a UDC file. We also have this get list that we need, so the term sets will automatically get the ID for the taxonomy on your SharePoint site. So you don't have to worry about that. And so let's just preview this real quick. And I have both demos in this one, so you'll see these are profile info on top and the taxonomy stuff on the bottom. And you can see that if I click on Get Term Sets, it's going to go off to SharePoint, the 365 site, and it's going to pull down those term sets. And it's going to give us this drop down here, and this is, on the 365 side, I've actually got these different taxonomy settings. When I select one, it shows me the children underneath it, and you can see here I've got drop downs. I can go down all the way. For the demo last week, I had added 365, and underneath that we only had InfoPath and SharePoint. You notice that if there isn't a parent, these values just revert back to the value instead of the display name. So let's just take a look at the site's taxonomy real quick, and let's see if we can change that. So on the site, I believe one of these tabs has my taxonomy settings. But anyway, it's very easy to do this within InfoPath. You can pull the taxonomy and embed it into InfoPath. And because I'm kind of short for time, I'm going to skip the change and re-show. We saw how it worked there with the taxonomy. The metadata was getting pulled into the form successively with the drop-downs. So I'm going to go to my last demo here and show you this refresh list because this is pretty cool. So last week we showed you this form, it's the expense report form, and I can just hide some of this stuff so you can see it here. So we have this expense report form on the site. The expense report form has a bunch of cool samples in it. Let's just take a look at this again. Okay, so we have in the browser, we're displaying this form, and it has, as you'll recall from last week's webinar, and this is on YouTube if you're wondering, we have a nice form that has, it has some features that you'll want to add to your form. It has a help section at the top. It has a header, a footer, title, the status of the form that's submitted. And you can see here that I can add these items for my expense. So this form is, we've repurposed the starter form to be an expense report form. And you can see that I've got my receipts underneath it. And I've got some change history at the bottom. So that's the form, right? So one thing I showed last week was I showed how you can add items here and how those items will show up in SharePoint. So specifically, if I add an item here, it will actually map it to the SharePoint site. And that location is down here. We have a list for expense items. You can see here that those two items are in the list. Now, if I change one of these items from the list and reopen the form, I have changed the form now to automatically update it based on that. So let's do this. Let's go into the airfare to Japan item, and we're going to change it to be one way, and we're going to change the price to be $900. So we'll just delete this text here, and we'll change the price to $900. Okay, so I've updated the item with the list. Okay, now, I'm going to go back to my form. This is a form library. And I'm going to open the same form that you just saw. And this form, on load, is actually sensing, oh, okay, that item changed. And here we show you the number. Even though this ID number isn't displayed down below, you could say something different, like one of the items, like the item in pink down below needs to be updated. Because it shows it's different, right? So what I do is I have this item here, this button called Update List Items. And what that's going to do is it's going to go out to the list, it's going to fetch the latest version, and it's going to then show me that latest information. And the way that works is, let me just show you that form. Well, one of these has got to be it. There it is. The way it works is, once again, we are just calling out to that common library, and we're actually setting the command to be updated list items. So this library, this common library that you're going to get injected into these forms today, has a tremendous number of commands. One of them is refresh list items, and you pass it in the name of the data source. So you have to have a data source called refresh SHP in your form. Well, it doesn't matter what the name is, you specify here. You have to have a column where you're storing the ID so it can know which one to update. And then you pass in the mapping so that it knows how to map from the list to the actual form, and you can define that mapping using another tool that we have. And then the mode here is update. You can also just report on the errors, and that's what we're doing in the first one here, is we're just reporting. Actually, on load, we're doing a report. So that's a very quick example of how you refresh list items from a list to an InfoPath form. And let's we'll go back to the slide. So I've got a few more minutes here. I can go talk about, actually I'm done with the time I usually have allotted. But I want to show you this other solution real quick that we have for doing compliance. And I'll start off and say that we have a website out here. If you go to our main website, we have underneath consulting, we have this thing called detailing service. So we've been doing this for about, 3 years. It is a service we provide to people. They have InfoPath forms. They want to make sure that they're following the best practice, right? So we have this really inexpensive service. They send us the form. We do an analysis, and we create a nice 5-page analysis of their form, and it includes all kinds of good stuff. So we look at the schema, the data source. We rate it based on the complexity of the data types and so forth. Here you can see that in this sample, John Martin, he's not doing so well on his schema. He's got 3 red items and one green item. But you know, he's got some good things in his form. So you can see here that we break out the analysis into these different sections, and then we explain here kind of what the issue is, what you should do, and so forth. Okay, so we've been doing this for 3 years, and it's relatively popular. We've probably done, I don't know, 40 or 50 of them. Not that popular. So then we said, well, why not just create a tool to do it? And so we did. We created a tool called, we're calling it let's see if I can find it here. Here it is. We're calling it the form detailing tool. So what you do is it's just an InfoPath form, and you've got some help here. There's some items that we're using, some terminology. It's a very simple form. You basically attach your form to it. So we're just going to use the expense report as an example here. I should have an expense report out there. Yes. ER. There it is, 2010. I'll take that one. It doesn't really matter. You just have to have an InfoPath form. And we'll put in my name. Okay, and then I click on the next button. Now what the form is going to do is it's automatically going to go out there and it's going to assess my form. So we have built into this form 31, I think it's 31 metrics, 11 of which are automatic. And you can see here that it has gone out, it's opened up the form, and it's done some analysis automatically on the form. You can extend those automatic metrics if you want. There's no code required, but you do have to understand how the manifest works in InfoPath. And essentially how the form is structured. Okay, then you can go through and subjectively you can answer these other questions that we cannot automate yet. So I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to randomly answer some questions here. You can see here one of these is automatic. We're doing the naming correctly. And I basically go through this form and I just basically select it. And obviously this is what we would do as part of our detailing. But you can do the same thing. You can answer your own questions. You can change these questions. It's totally data driven. And we'll just finish this out here real quick. And next. Okay, so now what it does is it generates a view that allows you to add comments. So if we were doing this, we would add a comment like, do this, here's a recommendation, here's how many hours it would take us to do it if you want us to do it. Okay, for the purpose of this quick demo, I'm just going to show you what this looks like. So you have the option at the top here of, just got 5 minutes stuff in here, of printing the form to PDF. So let's do that real quick. You can see it creates this nice form. It looks very similar to what I showed you earlier. You can use this form, this solution, to basically deploy in-house to enforce consistency amongst your team. And we are going to offer a special deal here in a minute or two, and you'll be able to get it. But let's just see here. If I want to print it, I can send the report out in email. I can print it, and there it is. So I'm just going to stop the demo now and ask you if you have questions. We do have some references on the P2 licensing plan. This is a huge improvement. Don't forget, we have our Quick Start InfoPath seminar coming up in a week or two. It's very inexpensive, and it's 30 minutes a day. It covers the 5 or 6 most important concepts regarding InfoPath, data-driven design, using XCPs and XML template parts, UDC files, and starter forms to accelerate your form development, and other techniques. This week, you're probably all waiting for this slide, but if you send us feedback, coursemanager@qdabra.com, we will send you this packet, the presentation I delivered, the samples for the profile service, the term sets, along with the expense report with the refreshed list item in it, and you'll also get the, I said that already, the webinar deck. Also, if you can answer this one question in your email, what is an AGAV, we will also send you that compliance form with installation instructions and so forth. And we'll give you a little bit of time to install it, support time. And that's for the first 2 people who can tell me what agave is. And that's it for the quick show and tell this morning. If you have questions, I'll be available for the next 5 minutes to answer them. Thank you all for coming. Next week, it will be a different person presenting, but we haven't decided the topic, but if you've got suggestions, please let us know. Probably it's going to be workflow. We're going to talk about integrating InfoPath with SharePoint workflows again, since that's a very popular topic. I'm just waiting for your questions. Do you have any? If not, thanks for joining me today. We'll get that packet out